D.A. Smith. D.A. Smith. The most unusual guy whom I encountered in my online life because he's sitting in Texas and translating Portuguese. Correct, Dave? Introduce yourself, please.
So yeah, I'm Dave Smith or DA. Either one works. It's easier to put DA Smith on a book because Dave Smith is a very common name. Um, I'm from Texas. I am currently, among other things, translating things from Portuguese. I've translated a number of things from Goa, and um, I'm currently working on some more stuff from Goa, actually. An old Jesuit textbook sort of thing from the 19th century, and the poetry of Vimala Devi.
Yeah, we'll go into the details later because not everyone watching might be familiar with the name, but we'll gently introduce those. But what I'd like to say, Dave, is that the way I found you was most unusual, and what you're doing is even more unusual. Like you're sitting in Texas and you're translating Portuguese, and we are exploiting your labor, of course. That's another fact. But tell us how you got involved with Portuguese in Texas.
So, a number of years ago, I started writing a historical novel set in the 16th century, and that's really sort of unimportant. But when I was doing research for it, I found that a lot of the stuff I wanted to read was in Portuguese because it involved sort of the first serious interactions between Europeans and people in India and points east. Um, so I decided it would probably be a good idea to learn Portuguese. And since I already spoke decent Spanish, having spent some time in Venezuela as a kid, and it's one of my mom's first languages, I already had a pretty good basis for learning Portuguese. So I started learning on my own, and there's a place here in Houston called, well, the name's changed, but at the time it was the Brazilian Arts Foundation, and they offered Portuguese classes. So I started attending those, I think in 2014, and I still keep going. It's mainly at this point just conversation with people I've known for a long time there. Um, but yeah, so that opened up a lot of possibilities, and I studied. I never had any sort of formal education in Portuguese, but I did a summer program in Macau at the University of Macau for Portuguese, and made trips to Portugal and to Goa and back to Macau. And let's see, and that's about it. I haven't made it to Brazil yet or anywhere in Africa that speaks Portuguese, but
That's
um,
most amazing. That's most amazing about you all guys. That once you all take up a language in the US, you all take it up with real seriousness. Or at least a few that I meet have done it that way. My earlier friend, my previous, my most senior friend is of course Robert Newman, who started studying Goa in the 70s, sorry 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And he's been into languages like, of course, he knows Portuguese, he knows Japanese, and all these kind of strange languages well enough to talk and well enough to carry it along. Tell us about the books you translated.
tell us about what? Which book?
Is my sound okay? I mean, can you hear me
It's a
okay?
little it's a little rough, but
It's a little rough. Just a
yeah,
second.
there's a lot of sort of
Okay. So now is it okay? Is it okay
much
now?
better.
Okay, sorry about that. So Dave, tell us about the books that you translated so far.
Okay, so the first book that I translated fully from Portuguese was Orlando da Costa's O Signo da Ira, which in English is The Sign of Wrath, and that was originally published, I want to say, in 1961, shortly before uh, Portugal lost control of Goa in December of 1961. Da Costa was of Goan descent. I think he was already living in Portugal at that time and had for a while. He is the father of Portugal's current prime minister, which is kind of interesting. And pretty prolific writer. He's written he wrote a number of other novels. Another of which I've worked on, but I haven't finished. Um, at the same time, or prior to that, I'd actually started work on translating the collected poetry of Lakshmanrao Sardesai, who was a Goan freedom fighter. And sort of notably in Goan literature, he was Hindu and not a Catholic. But he wrote a number of poems in Portuguese at a sort of very specific time in history, which was sort of between um, Goa becoming part of India and the
Opinion
vote.
poll. Opinion poll. Opinion poll.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the vote to decide whether or not Goa would be subsumed into Maharashtra or not. So he was very uh, against the merger. So he wrote a number of poems, sort of mostly political, about that subject in Portuguese, sort of to help sway the vote against uh, joining Maharashtra. Since that, so that was this sort of worked on those more or less concurrently. And then I translated a biography of Sita Valish, who was a Angolan slash Portuguese slash Goan woman. Her family came from Goa to Angola um, in the 1940s, I believe. And she was born and raised there. She studied in Portugal and then came back to Angola after they gained their independence from Portugal. She was a communist revolutionary, and she felt that it was sort of her duty as an Angolan to support the new state of Angola. Unfortunately, things didn't work out that well for Sita Valish. There was a sort of ongoing power struggle within the MPLA, the liberation group that came into power after independence in Angola, and there was a series of events that people have described it, depending on how you look at it, as an attempted coup or a popular uprising. Either way, the true nature of it sort of beside the point, because Sita Valish was imprisoned and shot, and her remains have never been found. But Frederick here is the one who brought her story to my notice, and I found it pretty fascinating. So, a journalist in Portugal named Leonor Figueiredo had written a biography of Sita Valish, and that's what I translated.
My role was minimal in it. I mean, you did all the donkey work. I just found the links. But anyways,
Right, but that's good
I,
enough. I wouldn't have known otherwise.
I'd also like to add that I'm so grateful to all the work you've been doing, Dave, because it actually gives us an insight into our past, which is difficult to access because of language and because of the shifts in language and all that. And the latest work which you're doing in, if you want to give people a sneak preview of what's to come, if I keep to my word, you're going to keep to your word, but if I will keep to my word. Don't worry.
Yeah, I hope so, because otherwise this is a lot of work for nothing.
Don't worry. No, that won't
Yeah.
happen. That won't happen.
So right now I'm working on two things. One is a 19th century Jesuit text about
Not 19th.
coconut palm.
Not
Hmm?
19th. Not 19th.
Yeah,
My,
it's originally from 1841.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
the edition that I've been translating from was published in the 1920s, but it's a reprint of an 1841, I think.
Okay.
The original. Yeah, it's a Jesuit text on palm tree cultivation, specifically coconut palms, called Arte Palmatica. Uh, and it's not very long; it's about 20 pages, but it's pretty interesting. Um, the actual author is currently unknown to me because it's attributed to a Jesuit, not anybody by name. It's I would be curious to know how much of the sort of techniques he describes in growing palm trees are still used today, and what people, if they're not used today, what people would think of them, because the author's attitude is pretty dismissive of local goans. He tends to think that every method they use for growing coconut palms is uh, inefficient and wasteful and just wrong. I, I don't know if he himself was Goan and just being a snob, or if he was Portuguese, because I'm not sure what the composition of the Jesuit order was like in Goa at that time. I could look into it and find out, but that's been an interesting project. Learned a lot about coconuts. Um, and I know that you've been working on a project about all the different sort of vocabulary related to coconuts in Konkani. So now, after reading this, you could probably add a bunch from Portuguese, or see how much they might have any sort of relationship. And so, on top of that, another project that I've been working on, which has been an ongoing thing, is the first book of poetry by Vimala Devi, um, which is a pen name. Her real name was Teresa de Almeida Baptista. Maybe it's Baptista Almeida. I feel bad. I can't remember off the top of my head. I always refer to her as Vimala when we speak. But she was sort of similar to Orlando da Costa, wherein she was born and raised in Goa and left for Portugal, and then eventually spent time in London and settled for good in Barcelona in Spain. And that's where she's been since the 70s. And she's almost 90 now. I don't think she's been writing much lately, but I got into contact with her a couple years ago to get permission to publish her work in translation. And we've kept up correspondence by mail and also the occasional phone call. So her work's pretty interesting because, well, in terms of poetry, her first book, not Monsal, that's short stories. I'm sorry, Surya, named after the sun god, is sort of got a vague neo-colonial wistfulness, sort of the typical Portuguese saudade, but it's more than just that. It's not just that. It's got a little more depth to it. Her later poetry was a lot more experimental and modern. I haven't translated any of that, but I think she's better known for her one book of short stories, which was Monsoon or Monsoon, which Paul Melody Castro has translated into English.
What
And I
about her
think,
anthology? Her anthology, which she co-wrote with her husband.
oh, that's right. That's a good point. That's maybe the thing she's best known for in terms of like go and study stuff. Yeah, she wrote an anthology or a study of Goan literature called Literatura Indo-Portuguesa, uh, Indo-Portuguese literature. And yeah, there's 2 volumes to that. There's an anthology of some selected works in Portuguese from Goa, and then there's a bunch of the other volume is like criticism and just sort of historical notes and everything. And yeah, that's right. Thanks for mentioning that, because she wrote that with her husband, and that was it's still a pretty seminal work, I'd say. I've read it, and it was pretty important stuff.
Dave, you feel translation is a thankless job?
It's not thankless, no. I think, and this isn't self-pity or anything, I think this is just a sort of fact of translation, having discussed it with enough people over the years. I think it's a fairly unseen job. I mean, you get 1,000 different attitudes towards translation, either from people who are reading translated work or translators themselves. Some people think that translation should be invisible and it should just be sort of the translator's job to make something seamless from one language to the next. Others have no problem interjecting their own sort of take on things. And then there's sort of, any number of positions in between. My own opinion on my work, on what I'm doing, sort of changes with time. I try not to be too literal in what I'm doing, but I also don't want it to sound too much like me or anything. I mean, one of the things to me that stands out is, as an American and without any sort of like family or social ties or anything to Goa, other than friends there and having visited a few times, I try not to make my translation sound overly American. I also don't want to use, for example, British or Indian English because that would sound just strange coming from somebody who's not like a native user of that variety of English. But to go back to your question, it's not thankless. No, I think it's pretty rewarding in and of itself, and knowing that I've managed to bring some stuff that's important in its own way into I've made some stuff that's important in its way available to people who previously couldn't read it. That's pretty gratifying in and of itself too. It's no, no. I think the work itself is thanks enough, and I've been fortunate, and the response to everything I've done has been pretty positive. So that certainly helps.
But what could be done to improve the situation of translators? What should publishers, authors be doing? Any checklist?
Man, I don't know. Honestly, it's it's hard to say. I mean, you would probably have to get to a more specific level than just broadly speaking. Like in the United States, for example, the I can't remember what the percentage of books that are sold are books in translation, but it's very low. I mean, it's English is its sort of dominant language in world literature in a lot of ways, and um, there's not as much material translated from other languages. And if it is, it's usually other languages like French or Spanish. Um, so in the U.S., I mean, there's not a ton of publishers that do work in translation or focus specifically on that. At least they're pretty small presses usually. Um, I don't know what the academic situation is like in terms of translation, sort of studies as a discipline. I imagine it's probably not great because again, if there's not a lot of demand, then they're not going to want to spend money on programs to produce translators. That might be different for academic work itself, but I don't know. Um, but in India, for example, I would imagine that given the wide range of languages in India, the translation is a lot more common. Um, but I also could be completely wrong. I mean, for all I know, that you're not getting a lot of, for example, Konkani to Marathi translations or vice versa. I mean, it's a really difficult situation to look at as a big picture. But if you were to do that, I would say, um, translation is like I said, it tends to be invisible, and I think maybe it could be just simply the profile of it could just be raised, where like make it clear that a lot of stuff you might be reading, you might not even know that it's translated, and the here's the sort of people that have done that. On the other hand, it's a weird time in the world where it seems like nationalism is sort of on the rise all over the globe, and I think that sort of ecumenical uh, global perspective it ebbs and flows. I think we're sort of at an ebb point right now. I hope I'm wrong, but I feel like there's possibly less demand for stuff from foreign languages, not just in the United States, but I could see that being a problem. Sort
Of
of
course,
all.
all bad things come to an end. So similarly with the ebb, I guess. But having said that, you snatched the point out of my mouth, because what I wanted to say is that in a multilingual society like Goa, like the rest of India, one would think that there is scope for a lot of translations. There is, but it's not happening. So what would be your suggestion to, say, people in Goa? What would we be looking at? What should we be looking at? What are the books waiting to be translated in Portuguese, for example?
In Portuguese, honestly, so I mean, Go is a sort of a special problem there because there's still, as far as I know, a fair number of people who speak and read and even write in Portuguese these days. But it feels like that's going to just be a sort of diminishing number. I know that that Goa University has a Portuguese program and everything like that, but again, that's pretty small. Um, and unless Portuguese were just to sort of be, I don't know, taught in secondary school as like a second or third language. Um, and I know there's always going to be sort of opposition to that politically, which is understandable for sure. Um, but unless I guess you sort of have a broader number of people being sort of channeled into learning the language and using it on some level, then it's going to be hard to sort of justify focusing on um, what's at this point sort of very, I don't want to say dead, but a static body of work in Portuguese from Goa because it's just not really growing. Um, as in terms of what needs to be published, I haven't really kept up with any new discoveries. Like I don't think that people are really finding any sort of long lost gems of Indo-Portuguese writing. I think most of it's been
Except Prayamar might have been an
right,
exception.
right, exactly. There's always gonna be something like that where there's a manuscript that just never got published. Um, Prayamar is a good example. That could again, like it's great that you published that in Portuguese
I
because
mean,
that
that
was
was because of the work done by Paul Melo Castro and Helder.
yeah. I helped a bit on that. I did a lot of the
I see.
proofreading on that. So yeah, that was a good find because Epitácio Pais, his short stories, which I read in Portuguese, are fantastic, and I think Paul has translated some of those. But I don't want to say that the body will just be the body of work will just be exhausted and everything will have been translated at some point. But because it isn't really growing, it's possible that at some point the major stuff is all just going to be done. There's always going to be something that remains untranslated from Portuguese and Goa, but it's going to be increasingly sort of obscure or specialized or technical. Like the Arte Pomatica, for example, I mean, it's a cool thing that you found, and I think it's a great historical document, and even sort of practical if you wanted to try to apply it to actually growing coconuts today. But that sort of thing, I wouldn't calling it literature might be a sort of a push. It's because it wasn't really written as literature. Um, but I think you're going to start seeing more material like that in translation from Goa than instead of novels or short stories or anything, unless we just find, like I said, somebody else's unpublished manuscript in a desk drawer somewhere.
Yeah, sounds a bit negative a note to end on. I mean, I'm hoping that I'm wrong and you're wrong. Of
Oh,
course,
absolutely. I really hope I'm wrong. And like, don't get and like I said, like I am not as well versed in the sort of state of uh, uncovering new material
neither
as
am
I
I,
go.
neither am I. But it is a fact. It is a fact. I just read the other day, much to my shock and dismay, that Portuguese in Goa is actually an endangered language. It's on the list of endangered languages. Portuguese in Goa. So, but you never know how things shape up and things like that. We've been trying some WhatsApp groups online for people wanting to learn the language, and so there are kind of people from all over the place interested. I don't know how that shapes up. Anyway, we can only hope for the best, and we can
Yeah,
hope to play our cards right. Yeah, sorry.
no, I think you're right, and I know that the sort of broad attitude in Goa towards the Portuguese past is ambivalent, let's say at best, and that's perfectly understandable. But at the same time, I think people also realize that it's you can't just ignore it, and it's there, and for it to be something other than a sort of tourist trap aspect where oh, come see some churches and come drink Fenny and come and then go to the beach and go to Panjim or something. If it's more, if it's going to be more than that, then I think goers are going to have to sort of uh, wrestle with the questions of the language itself and whether or not that's something that they want to keep us whether they want it to be a living aspect of Goan culture or just some part of the past that's just allowed to fade away. And that's up to Goans. It's their choice.
Yeah, but with that, actually, Daniel says, "Hello, amazing and very interesting stream." Thanks, Daniel. With that, I would like to, really conclude. But before doing that, I want to say one thing, that we are so grateful, Dave, for all the contributions you've done and for opening our eyes to a reality which we would have been totally, visually challenged to, let's say, if had it not been for the work of people like you, Paul Melo Castro, and all that. And apart from that, on a smaller note, on a minor note, even talking to you this evening has an early morning your time. I hauled you out of bed. Sorry about that.
Oh no,
Uh,
I've already been up for hours.
Okay, okay. So talking to you this evening has also been insightful because it gave me so many ideas. And as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking like, okay, this is where we are lacking, and this is what needs to be done. And so it's really a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's a blessing knowing you and being in touch and accidentally meeting you through the network and all those kind of things. Lastly, a word on Pensando Goa, if you just want to introduce it to people who are not aware.
Oh, Pensando Goa? Sure. So I'm not an academic. It's a primarily academic sort of network, but Pensando Goa or Thinking Goa is a group of scholars from all over the world, really, mainly Portuguese speaking countries, Portugal, Brazil, some in Goa, some elsewhere, I believe, too. But
Mostly Brazil. Mostly Brazil.
yeah, I think it's heavily Brazil. Um, but yeah, mainly just scholars from around the world, the Lusophone countries, who are working on various topics related to Goan literature and culture in Portuguese. Now, not strictly. Obviously, a lot of the people have uh, worked on material that relates between, say, Konkani and Portuguese and that sort of thing. But that the primary focus seems to be Goa's sort of Portuguese linguistic and literary heritage.
Once again, thanks a ton for all your time, for all your
Yeah,
insights,
my
for all
pleasure.
your work over the years. I hope that this is only one of the commas along the way, and it's not a full stop. And we continue. And I hope
Yeah,
you get
right.
more. You can get more insights into translating Goa and giving us new insights. So grateful to you for all that. Thanks so much,
Well, I owe
Dave.
you, yeah, I owe you quite a debt too because I mean, you said that
That's
I've
rubbish. That's not true. That's just not true.
no, I wouldn't have had access to all sorts of stuff without the doors you've opened. So
That's
I'm
the least.
super
That's the least I
appreciative.
can do. That's the least I can do. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
We'll be in touch. Bye.
Yeah, take care, Frederick.
Dave, if anyone wants to contact you, just a contact, email.
Oh, yeah, you
I'll type it
I
in here.
can. Yeah, there's my giving you my email address or
That's what's it. Can you just tell it? Can you just
yeah,
mention it?
here I'll write it in the chat.
Okay.
You have my WhatsApp number too, right?
Oops. Yeah. Fine. That's it. That's the right one.
Yeah,
Dave.addison.smith
that's it.
at gmail.com. Thanks a ton,
Or
Dave. We'll be in
you can
touch.
also put the WhatsApp number in there if you want.
Yeah. What's it? You
Oh, my WhatsApp number. Let me look. I gotta. It is.
you tell it. You can just tell it to me. I'll type it in.
Yeah, it's weird. It's super specific the way that it wants me to enter it. So,
+1.
uh, yeah. So it's +1. Print here. I'll just write it myself. It'll
Yep.
be right here. All right, that should do it.
Right. That's it. Yep. Whoops. 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 Fine. Thanks a ton. Bye for
Thank
now.
you, man. All
We'll be
right.
in
Talk
touch.
to you later.